Good afternoon, everyone. Yes. Last session of the day. Are you ready? Now, I apologize. My voice is super croaky. I blame it on too much karaoke. But so apologies if I clear my throat a little bit. You heard earlier that Kun Kwan promised certificates for everyone after this, right? After the 3 days? Did he tell you that there's an exam? You know there's an exam? Yeah, yes, there's an exam. Yes, on Friday you have to do an exam. You have to come up here.
Tomorrow there'll be no one here because
No. But you should see the certificate. It has Kwan's picture on it. Big smiling face. It's beautiful. Beautiful certificate. So on the last day, we want to hear about your projects. This session is all about your deals. How do we get your deals done? How do we get investors through the door excited about the projects that are being done in Thailand? And Thai municipalities, wow. And we want people to come running because there are opportunities here. And how do we do that? So all of these sessions are giving little more hints and little more ideas. And so this session this afternoon is going to be about a couple of the major pieces that you'll want to bring forward for the private sector. Now, a lot of you have heard me speak before, and you've heard my reference to PPP and private sector a bit like marriage. Right? Have you heard that? So it's just like marriage. When I got married, my beautiful, amazing, incredible wife is bizarre. Women are weird. They're so different. And she thinks I'm weird because I do things differently. So how do we figure each other out and how do we work together? And marriage is every day learning and growing, right? And so bringing a private investor in is very similar. You need to figure out how the private sector thinks. And often as government, we tend to have a way that we do things, and it makes us a little uncomfortable to get outside of that and to work with private sector. And there's some good reasons for that, right? We all know stories of bad things that happened when government officials work too closely with private sector and they get attracted by all the things the private sector has to offer. So we want to be very careful about that. But at the same time, most of those private investors are good, honest people that just want to make money. So how do we help them see that this clicker works? Yes. How do we help them see that this project is going to be really exciting? One piece that's going to be really important for them is the dynamic of costs, revenues. And revenues on our little diagram here are revenue plus demand. So who's going to use what you're building? We heard the example of the prison in Portland. They built the prison, no one came. They didn't need it. It was a great idea, but they hadn't dug down into it to know exactly what needed to be done. When the private investor comes into your office, they want to know that you've done all of your homework, that you know what your costs are, that you know where your revenues are coming from. What does that look like? Now, we have a tendency to look at revenues in kind of a very simple manner, right? We look at an asset and we think, all right, I'm going to charge people to use this service. Okay, I'm going to make a certain amount of money from charging people, and then the government is going to add whatever else is needed. And that's a usual simple way of thinking about services. But actually, the infrastructure that we build does so much more. The beneficiaries of that infrastructure are huge. And reflecting back to our example in Portland, in that area in the city, they redeveloped that area, and the land value multiplied 8 times. That is massive. So when you're feeling bad for the private sector because you're forcing them to do things or you're asking them to do things, they're going to make lots of money off of these deals. The better when you help them do the deal, when you help bring that value in to deliver infrastructure, you get more infrastructure, they get more profit. So how do we get that balance right? And so our suggestion or my hope is that from now on, when we do deals, first we ask, what can I charge people to use this service? Be reasonable, don't want to overcharge, don't want to overexpect. After that, what about the land around the project? What is the value of that land? How much does that land value go up? How much of that land value can I bring into the project? And we'll talk about various ways to do that. Third is, what are the commercial activities around the project? What commercial opportunities are that I can help encourage and create? The more commercial opportunities, the more jobs, the more economic development, the more commercial opportunities for the people in the city. Everyone benefits. And you bring money in to pay for the infrastructure that allows you to build even more infrastructure. And the next project creates jobs and opportunities and commercial growth and economic growth. So it's this virtuous circle that we want to create. And so this looks a little bit like this. It is a whole series of opportunities and activities in and around infrastructure that provide these opportunities. Does anybody have one of these? A phone? Anybody remember in the old days when phones were attached to the wall and didn't move? Do you remember that? This phone was stuck to the wall. If you wanted to talk, you had to stand by the wall and walk back and forth. If your little sister was on the phone, like mine, and talking, no one else could call because your one phone was taken. Someone was crazy enough to think, I'm going to shove all of that in this little tiny box. I'm going to take every photo I've ever taken and shove it in this little tiny box. I'm going to take my entire record collection and shove it in this little tiny box. Crazy people. So I want to make you crazy people. Yes? We heard from our friend, the deputy mayor from Rayong. He's a completely crazy person. He goes in and looks at a bus terminal, an old bus terminal built 20 years ago. What does he see? He doesn't see a bus terminal. He sees buses and parks and restaurants and retail and opportunity after opportunity. He looks at something very simple and sees huge possibility. Now, after we get crazy, then we're going to get real. Okay, but let's start with crazy, open up the opportunities, and then after that, we're going to dig down into the reality of this and make sure that everything works. Because when the private investor comes in to your office and you talk about big, huge, exciting opportunities, that's fantastic, gets them excited too. But then they're going to ask, so show me your numbers, show me your calculations, show me what homework you've done. Have you done your homework? So first we want big ideas, then we do our homework and we narrow down and we get concrete, solid things. Okay, but first let's get crazy. All right, let's talk about a few thoughts. A bus terminal. It's a bus terminal in India. They built this big bus terminal with a private investor, and they were going to make all their money back by charging fees to the buses. So what do you think happened? The buses didn't stop in the terminal. The buses stopped down the street. Right? Of course. They drop the people off. The people go into the terminal. They enjoy the terminal. But the buses stay outside and they don't pay any fees. So they then had to reimagine the whole project and turn it into various revenue sources. So imagine a place where all these people come. How could you make money off of that? You've got retail, you've got restaurants, you've got advertising, all these people coming through. Huge opportunities. What does that look like? Open up your perspective. Get weird. Beautiful little building in Singapore. Actually, this is right near where I live. And my apologies, I never did introduce myself or say where I was coming from or what we were talking about. My name is Jeff. I work in infrastructure finance at the World Bank, and I'm based in Singapore, very close by. And I love Thailand. I've never been able to spend much time here, but now because of working with you guys, I've gotten to explore an amazing country. So my job at the World Bank is to help World Bank staff think about attracting private capital into infrastructure of all kinds. I'm a lawyer by background. Sorry. Somebody has to be a lawyer. But I've escaped the law firm, and so now I'm working at the World Bank. And so sometimes I get excited about contracts and provisions and things like that, but just bear with me. So Singapore, I live down the street from this building, beautiful old building. It's an old power station. And the government wanted to keep the old building. So what do? Of course, they found a big company. They waited until they found the right company at the right price. And they wanted Dyson to come in, Dyson, the big vacuum and all kinds of electronics manufacturer. And they brought in talented people. They brought in money. They brought their engineers there. They're going to do research and development. They did all these cool things. And they built this sort of museum thing in the middle of the building so that the public can go in and enjoy the building and really appreciate it. And Dyson gets all the glory. And there's a big sign that says Dyson across the front. Fantastic. Airports are great examples of this kind of logic. Every airport is run this way if there's a private element to it. And so in Changi, and those of you who have flown through Singapore before, amazing airport. If you've gone to see the Jewel, which is the new shopping mall in the middle of the airport with this massive waterfall that comes out of the sky, really beautiful. But what's that there for? Is that there just because people like waterfalls? No, it brings the people in. Singaporeans go to the airport for the weekend so they can go to the airport and go shopping. That's crazy. Who goes to the airport because they want to? You go to the airport because you have to, but they've created something that's so attractive that people will come. In Bali in Indonesia, the airport company brought in an Indian investor. The Indian investor just did the land side, just did the commercial piece. The state-owned enterprise kept the control of the airport. The private investor came in and they increased revenues 300%. Just because the private investor thinks about profit. And so they made it into this fantastic shopping mall. It's a little annoying because when you walk through, they make you walk the entire shopping mall. And then you get to the airplane. But you see all kinds of nice stuff and people stop and shop, good restaurants. It's a really nice ambiance. And it's something that private sector is very good at selling. Public sector is very good at delivery. And so bring those two together and you've got really powerful combination. So airports generally are done on this basis. This is a football stadium in the UK, Wembley Stadium. They make good money off of the football, but they make even more money off of concerts and events and things like that. They had BTS came there. There's no K-pop in Thailand, right? No, is there? Really? Did you see the first person that said, BTS? It's Kwan. And he doesn't even have kids of that age as an excuse. It's just a K-pop fan. So they use the facility, but they keep delivering the football. Singapore did the same model. Singapore had struggled with it, though. Singapore developed a new stadium on a PPP with private sector. They opened it up, but the government had a hard time letting go. They had a hard time letting the private sector drive the commercial conversation. Because for Singapore, and Singapore delivers things very well, I think that's part of their problem, is Singapore does things very well, and so they just assume that they should do it. They have a hard time letting go and letting the private sector do these things. But it's tricky because sometimes you view your stadium as a special public asset. But can you open up enough to allow the private sector to make money? And be honest. If the answer is no, then don't do it. If you want it as a public asset, keep it as a public asset. Do not bring in a private partner because they will never have the same vision as you. But if you're willing to combine, so if you don't want to get married, don't get married. It's not worth it. Public market in Philippines. And let's think about some of the public markets that We had the same thing across Africa, all over the world. The idea of the public market is to give space to small vendors so that they can sell their goods. They don't have to be on the street. They can have a nice clean space, but it doesn't make a lot of money. And this market burned down. It was going to cost the government 100 million pesos to rebuild it, which would have cost them 10 million a year in debt service and operating costs. But instead, they went with a private company, private developer. They partnered with them. And so if you see on the bottom floors where all the public vendors are, where the vendor stalls are, so they get prime spot right on the ground floor. And then up above are all the restaurants and the boutiques and cinema and bowling alley, and they put a bunch of parking in it underground and up above. That solved the parking problem for the neighborhood. It brings in, whereas before it was going to cost them 10 million pesos to build the thing, now they receive 20 million pesos in revenue. Now, that's not always the case. Depends on the location, depends on the situation, but you can see that kind of dynamic that this creates. A school in Washington, D.C., how can you make money off of a school? Well, it was a school in a nice, it wasn't way out in the suburbs, but it was a decent part of town. And they took half the land and they built apartment blocks. And the apartment complex paid for the whole school to be refurbished, all the latest technology, all the latest kit, and it's one of the best schools in Washington, D.C. now. Here's a street in downtown in Peru. Actually two projects that did this. And it was all congested and messy, and what do you do with this? You've seen these kind of situations. The cars are parked all over the place and everything's a mess. And so they dug down. They dug down and built 3 levels of parking, solved all the parking problems. And then they built the street up so that they've got blocks and things so that you cannot park on the street. And they enforced the parking. So the government was willing to take that step, but because people had access to the parking, they had no more excuses. And the parking actually generates revenue and generates revenue back for the city. Beautiful building in Turkey. This one was interesting because they waited 20 years to develop it, only because there was a fight between the 2 ministries in central government and the local government. Anybody had experience with fights between central government and local government? No, not at all. So this isn't for Thailand. This is for somewhere else. But in other countries, they have a hard time working together, right? Because again, perspective is different, plans are different, and everybody wants to protect their space. So they actually used a private investor as an excuse to get everyone in the same room. And because instead of looking at each other and pointing at each other, now they were all pointing at the private investor. And the private investor had to deliver for everyone. And the result was fantastic. They built out a new museum, lots of public space, but beautiful building, and it's now maintained. And it's a center of attraction for tourism. So it's a big thing for the city. Here's a fire station and a library in Washington. Again, how do you make money off of that? Well, air rights. So over the library, they built a condominium. And over the fire station, because nobody wants to live above a fire station, but they built low-cost housing. So if you're getting your housing for cheap and it's in a decent part of town, that sounds good. So the condominium paid for a beautiful new fire department, a beautiful new library, all the latest kit. And then the low-cost housing received subsidies from central government, and so the whole package worked together. And you can see the low-cost housing there on the right. On the right, if you look at that top right picture, you see the low-cost housing up above, and in the middle is a squash court, a series of squash courts. Now, squash is not very big in the United States. In the United States, we play racquetball. Squash is a European thing. Anybody want to guess why we have squash courts? Anybody know? No guesses? Why do you think? Why would you put squash courts in the middle of a project that has nothing to do with squash? Because one of the politicians played a lot of squash. And to get the last sign off, they decided to put in the squash courts, and which has actually ended up earning them money, and it's all been fine. But sometimes you adjust your design in order to fit the dynamics of the situation. Okay, so that's that. There's a second piece to this, and a really interesting piece that I know is is very interesting in Thailand. The Thai government has done a lot in this space, and that's emission reduction credits. So here's yet another new revenue stream that we can bring into our projects as long as we reduce our emissions, as long as you mitigate or remove emissions. It's a huge market. An important part of it is driven by big companies, global companies and Thai companies who have made net zero commitments. And they have said by a certain date, usually 2040, 2050, we will be net zero. To get to net zero, they have to do a lot of hard work. And as part of that, they will pay other people to reduce their emissions. And so they will buy credits from other people that reduce emissions. So if your project can show that you've got building efficiency, so you've reduced energy consumption, if you use solar panels, if you set up electric street lighting and smart meters, if you build out electric vehicles, there are all these opportunities to make investments that will reduce emissions and create a new revenue stream. These big companies are desperate for opportunities to buy these credits. At the moment, they're focusing mainly on forestry projects and things like that. But those are creating all kinds of challenges, all kinds of difficulties in monitoring and measurement and verification. Another really, another really exciting area is urban investment. Huge opportunities for mitigating emissions through urban investment. Can we use this as another source of revenue to bring in additional capital? It's not an easy space. It's a weird market. It's evolving. It's growing. On top of this, there's the Paris Agreement that everybody signed up to in 2017. The Paris Agreement, where the corporates made net zero. The Paris Agreement has countries that have committed to reducing emissions. But those are two parallel questions. And so you need to figure out, how do you navigate between those two? How do you generate the right kind of credits with the right characteristics and with the right pieces to them? So this is not an easy extra money for free. It takes some effort, but there's some real opportunities for revenues. And Mark's going to talk about some very practical examples of this in just a minute. And so just to let you know that we, on the World Bank side, we've been working with a lot of different governments on exactly this kind of question, and both with cities and central governments, trying to help those governments mobilize emission reduction credits. There's a lot of really good material that we're putting together, and we'd be delighted to come and share this with you and work through some of these issues with you if that would be of interest. So, okay, my voice held up, and not too many people fell asleep. That's good. Can I save, I want to do a Q&A, some questions, chat about some of this stuff, push you guys on your ideas and what you want to do next. Can I hand over to Mark first, and then we'll do Q&A at the end? Is that okay? Awesome.